The numbers on the holographic screen were bad. They had been bad for 3 months now, and they were getting worse every single day. Fleet Commander Tora stood in the command center of his flagship, all 4 of his arms crossed over his chest, and stared at those numbers like they might change if he looked hard enough. They did not change. 7 million galactic credits. That was how much the Varel Interstellar Trade Armada was losing every day, not every week, not every month. Every single day. The silver scales on Tora's face had turned pale from stress, and the tips of his pointed ears twitched with frustration. Behind him, his senior officers waited in silence. They had learned not to speak when the commander was looking at the financial reports. Nothing good ever came from those conversations. The Varel Armada was one of the largest trading fleets in the known galaxy. 83 massive cargo ships, each one capable of carrying enough goods to supply an entire planet for a year. These ships traveled across 12 star systems, moving everything from food to medicine to building materials. The Armada had been in operation for over 200 years, and it had never faced a problem like this. The ships were eating fuel like starving animals. Every single one of them was consuming nearly 3 times the amount of fuel they should need. The engines worked fine. The cargo holds were not overloaded. The navigation systems calculated the most efficient routes, and yet the fuel just kept disappearing. Tora turned away from the screen and faced his officers. "Give me the update." Chief Financial Officer Mora stepped forward. She was a thin Varel with dark blue scales and nervous eyes. "Commander, at the current rate of loss, we will be forced to reduce our fleet operations within 6 months. Within a year, we will be bankrupt." "I am aware of the timeline," Tora said. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room could hear the anger underneath it. "What about the engineers?" "The Kellex team completed their inspection yesterday," Mora said. "They found nothing wrong. The Oran specialists are finishing their report today, but early indications suggest they will reach the same conclusion." "And the Mora Syndicate? They left last week," they said, and I quote, "The ships are functioning perfectly. The problem must be in your accounting." Tora's scales flushed dark with anger. "Our accounting is not losing 7 million credits a day." Nobody disagreed with him. The accounting was fine. Everyone knew the accounting was fine. The problem was in the ship somewhere, hiding in the machinery like a ghost that no one could catch. The Varel Armada had brought in the best minds from across the Galactic Cooperative, engineers with centuries of experience. Scientists who had designed the engines that powered half the ships in known space. Specialists who could look at a machine and understand its problems the way a doctor understood a patient. None of them had found anything. The ships were perfect. Every diagnostic test came back clean. Every component was working exactly as designed, and yet, the fuel kept disappearing, and the credits kept vanishing, and the Armada kept sliding toward destruction. Tora was not a being who gave up easily. He had commanded this fleet for 40 years. He had survived 3 trade wars, 2 pirate attacks, and a political scandal that nearly destroyed his career. He was not going to let some invisible fuel leak destroy everything he had built. "There is one more option," he said slowly. His officers exchanged glances. They knew what he was thinking, and they did not like it. "Commander," Chief Engineer Voss said carefully, "with respect, I do not think that is wise." Voss was a Kellex, a species known throughout the galaxy for their engineering brilliance. He had 12 tentacles, 3 advanced degrees, and more than 200 years of experience. His species had been building starships when most other races were still learning to make fire. "The humans have only been part of galactic society for 40 years, Voss continued. "Their technology is primitive. Their methods are crude. Hiring a human engineer would be an insult to the experts who have already examined these ships." "The experts have found nothing," Tora said, "because there is nothing to find. The ships are functioning correctly. Then explain the 7 million credits." Voss had no answer for that. None of them did. Tora made his decision. He pulled up the contract posting system and began to type. "I am posting a consultation request to the human networks. If their primitive methods find something that your advanced technology has missed, then perhaps we all need to reconsider what we think we know. The posting went out across the communication channels that connected human space to the rest of the galaxy. It was a simple request. Experienced mechanic needed for ship diagnostics. Payment of 50,000 credits upon completion. Most of the responses were useless. Amateurs looking for easy money. Frauds claiming expertise they did not have. A few genuine mechanics who were already committed to other contracts. But one response stood out. Her name was Bora Kang. She was 34 years old, born on a human colony world called New Busan. Her work history was simple and straightforward. 15 years as a ship mechanic, starting when she was just 19. She had worked on everything from small personal shuttles to massive cargo haulers. Her references were solid, her rates were reasonable, and she could start immediately. Tora approved the contract and sent her the coordinates of the flagship. She responded with 3 words. See you tomorrow. The next morning, a small shuttle appeared on the flagship's sensors. It was old. Very old. The hull was scratched and dented. The paint was faded, and one of the landing lights flickered like it might die at any moment. The shuttle looked like it belonged in a museum, not in the docking bay of a modern trading vessel. Tora watched from the observation deck as the shuttle landed. The docking bay was spotless, filled with gleaming equipment and pristine surfaces. The human shuttle looked like a dirty sock thrown onto a clean bed. The hatch opened, and Bora Kang stepped out. She was shorter than Tora had expected. Most humans were tall compared to other species, but this one barely reached his shoulder. She had black hair pulled back in a practical knot, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and hands that were rough with years of hard work. She carried a worn toolkit in one hand and a metal container in the other. Steam rose from a small hole in the top of the container, and a strange, bitter smell filled the air. What is that? Tora asked as she approached. Coffee, Bora said. You want some? Tora had no idea what coffee was, but the smell made his nose wrinkle. No. Thank you. Your loss. She took a sip and looked around the docking bay with calm curiosity. Nice ship. Clean. Where's the engine room? Tora studied her for a moment. She did not seem impressed by the flagship. She did not seem nervous about meeting an alien commander. She did not seem like anything special at all. Your credentials say you have worked on cargo haulers, he said carefully. 15 years. Our engineers have centuries of combined experience. The finest minds in the Galactic Cooperative have examined these ships and found nothing wrong. Bora shrugged. She took another sip of her coffee and looked at him with those calm, dark eyes. Maybe they were looking for the wrong thing. And you think you can find what they missed? Won't know until I look. She glanced at the chrono display on the wall. I've got until lunch. Mind showing me around? Tora did not know whether to be offended or amused. This small human with her old shuttle and her strange drink thought she could solve a problem that had defeated the greatest engineering minds in the galaxy. It was absurd. It was insulting. But he was desperate. Follow me, he said, and led her toward the engine rooms. The engine rooms of the flagship were massive. They stretched across 3 levels, filled with machinery that hummed and glowed with power. Pipes as thick as trees ran along the walls. Control panels blinked with thousands of tiny lights. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. Bora Kang walked through it all like she was taking a stroll in a park. Chief Engineer Voss followed close behind her, his 12 tentacles moving with barely controlled irritation. He had been ordered by Commander Tora to assist the human consultant, and he was not happy about it. Every step she took felt like an insult to his 200 years of experience. The diagnostic systems are located on the main control platform, Voss said, pointing toward a raised area covered in holographic displays. All ship data flows through those terminals. You can access fuel consumption rates, engine performance metrics, component stress levels, and, nice, Bora said, not looking at the control platform. She was walking toward one of the massive fuel lines that ran along the wall. Voss paused. The terminals contain all the information you need. Every expert who has examined these ships has started with the diagnostic data. I'm sure they have. Bora stopped in front of the fuel line. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, smooth and silver, with perfectly welded joints. She reached out and touched it with her bare hand. Voss made a sound of surprise. "That is not. You should not touch the fuel lines directly. There are protocols for physical inspection that require—" "It's warm," Bora said. She moved her hand along the pipe, feeling the surface like she was petting an animal. Good pressure. No vibration. She moved on, walking deeper into the engine room. Voss followed, his tentacles twitching with frustration. This was not how inspections were done. There were procedures, methods, systems designed over centuries to ensure accurate diagnostics. This human was just walking around and touching things. If you would look at the data, Voss tried again, you would see that all systems are operating within acceptable parameters. Fuel consumption should not be a problem. And yet, what's that sound? Bora interrupted. Voss listened. He heard nothing unusual. What sound? Bora held up a hand for silence. She stood perfectly still. Her head tilted to one side like a hunting animal. Her eyes moved slowly across the engine room. But she was clearly focusing on something else. She was listening. After a long moment, she walked toward the fuel injection manifolds. These were smaller than the main fuel lines, a complex series of pipes and connectors that fed fuel directly into the engine cores. They were made of a dark metal that shimmered in the light, and they were considered some of the finest engineering in the galaxy. Kellick's design, Voss said with obvious pride. Each manifold is calibrated to within 0.0001% accuracy. The precision required to manufacture these components is beyond what most species can achieve. Bora nodded slowly. They're beautiful. Voss relaxed slightly. Perhaps this human understood quality when she saw it. Yes. The Kellicks have been perfecting fuel injection technology for over 1,000 years. These manifolds represent the peak of that development. Who installed them? The question caught Voss off guard. What do you mean? The manifolds. Who put them in? Was it the same team on all 83 ships? Voss thought about it. The same installation protocol was used across the entire fleet. Standardized procedures ensure consistent quality. Same protocol, Bora said. Same way every time. On all the ships. Of course, standardization is essential for fleet operations. Bora did not respond. She was staring at the manifolds with an expression Voss could not read. Then she did something that made him gasp in horror. She dropped to her knees and began crawling under the manifold housing. What are you doing? Voss demanded. That area is not. There are no serviceable components under there. The installation protocols do not include. Got a light? Bora's voice echoed from beneath the machinery. Voss stood frozen. This was madness. This was completely against procedure. This human was crawling around under equipment that no engineer had ever thought to inspect, looking at spaces that contained nothing important. But Commander Tora had ordered him to assist. With great reluctance, Voss extended one of his bioluminescent tentacles into the gap. The tip glowed with soft blue light, illuminating the dark space where Bora had disappeared. Silence followed. Long, uncomfortable silence. Voss could see the human's boots sticking out from under the machinery. She was not moving. She was just lying there, looking at something he could not see. Well? He asked impatiently. What do you see? More silence. Then Bora laughed. It was a short sound, sharp and sudden. Not a happy laugh. More like the sound someone makes when they finally understand a joke that everyone else missed. What? Voss asked. What is it? What did you find? Bora slid out from under the manifold housing. Her white jumpsuit was covered in dust and grime. She had a strange smile on her face. I need to see another ship, she said. Why? What did you find? I need to make sure I'm right. Can you take me to another ship? Voss stared at her. In 200 years of engineering work, he had never met anyone like this human. She had spent less than an hour in the engine room. She had not looked at a single diagnostic display. She had crawled around on the floor like a child playing in the dirt. And now she was smiling like she knew a secret. I will arrange transport, Voss said finally. But I want to know what you saw. Any Bia? Not yet, Bora said. She pulled herself to her feet and brushed some of the dust off her clothes. If I'm wrong, I don't want to look stupid. If I'm right, she trailed off, looking at the manifolds one more time. If you're right. What? Voss pressed. Bora picked up her toolkit and her coffee container. If I'm right, you're going to have a very interesting afternoon. 2 hours later, Bora had visited 3 more ships. On each one, she followed the same strange procedure. She ignored the diagnostic systems. She walked through the engine rooms. She touched things. She listened to sounds that no one else could hear. And on each ship, she crawled under the fuel injection manifolds and lay there in the dark, looking at something invisible. By the time they returned to the flagship, word had spread through the fleet. The human consultant was doing something strange. She was not following procedures. She was not using the proper equipment. She was crawling around on the floor like some kind of primitive animal. Commander Tora was waiting for them in the main conference room. 17 senior engineers had gathered, all of them curious about what this unusual human had discovered. Bora walked in with dust on her clothes and confidence in her step. She looked at the gathered engineers, some of the finest minds in the galaxy, and she smiled. I know what's wrong with your ships, she said. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward her. And it's going to make all of you feel very silly. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ship's engines in the distance. Bora set down her toolkit and her coffee. She looked at Commander Tora. You might want to sit down for this. The conference room was quiet. 17 of the finest engineers in the galaxy sat in their seats, staring at the small human woman who had just claimed to solve a problem that had defeated them all. Commander Tora stood at the head of the table, his forearms folded across his chest. His silver scales caught the light as he turned to face Bora. Explain, he said simply. Bora nodded. She walked to the holographic display panel and began pressing buttons. After a moment, an image appeared in the air above the table. It showed a close-up view of a small metal clamp holding a fuel line in place. The engineers looked at the image. Then they looked at each other. Then they looked back at the image. A clamp? Voss said, his tentacles curling with confusion. You are telling us that a clamp is causing 7 million credits of daily losses? Yes and no, Bora said. She picked up a small laser pointer and circled the clamp in the image. Look at this clamp. It's perfect. Absolutely perfect. The angle is exact. The pressure is correct. The installation follows every single specification in your engineering manual. Then what is the problem? Another engineer asked. Bora smiled. It was not a mocking smile. It was the kind of smile a teacher gives when a student asks exactly the right question. The problem, she said, is that perfect is wrong. She pressed more buttons, and a second image appeared beside the first. This one showed a technical diagram of the fuel injection manifold system. These manifolds are Kelix-made, Bora said. Beautiful work. Some of the finest precision engineering I've ever seen. Every single measurement is exact. Every angle is calculated to a fraction of a fraction. Voss straightened with pride. This was true. Kelix engineering was famous throughout the galaxy. But these fuel lines, Bora continued, pointing to a different part of the diagram, are made by the Oran Collective. Different company. Different planet. Different materials. The components are fully compatible, Voss said. We verified this before installation. All measurements fall within acceptable ranges. Yes, they do, Bora agreed. When the engines are cold, the room went silent. Bora let the words hang in the air for a moment. Then she continued. Here's the thing about materials. Different materials expand differently when they get hot. The Kelix manifolds are made from an alloy that expands 0.003% when the engines reach operating temperature. The Oran fuel lines expand 0.009%. She drew 2 lines on the diagram, showing the different expansion rates. That difference is tiny. So tiny that your diagnostics don't even notice it. It falls within the acceptable margin of error. No alarms. No warnings. Everything looks fine. If it falls within acceptable margins, Voss said slowly, then how can it cause a problem? Because your clamps are too perfect. Bora zoomed in on the image of the clamp. These clamps hold the fuel lines at exactly the right angle. They don't allow any movement. They don't allow any flexibility. When the engines heat up and the fuel lines try to expand, they can't. They're locked in place. She pressed another button, and a simple animation began to play. It showed fuel flowing through a pipe, smooth and steady. This is what fuel flow should look like, Bora said. Smooth, clean, efficient. She pressed another button. The animation changed. Now the fuel was moving differently. It tumbled and swirled, creating tiny patterns of chaos inside the pipe. This is what happens when the fuel lines can't expand properly. The metal bends just a tiny bit too small to see, too small to measure. But it creates a microscopic curve at the injection point. The fuel doesn't flow anymore. It tumbles. She paused, letting the engineers study the animation. When fuel tumbles instead of flows, you lose efficiency. In this case, about 15% per injection cycle. Not enough to trigger any alarms, not enough to show up on diagnostics. But across 83 ships, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 7 million credits. Tora breathed. Give or take, Bora said. The room erupted into chaos. Engineers began shouting in half a dozen languages. Some were arguing. Some were pulling up diagrams on their personal displays. Voss looked like he might collapse, his tentacles hanging limp at his sides. This is impossible, one engineer said. Our systems would have detected this. Your systems detect failures, Bora said calmly. This isn't a failure. Everything is working exactly as designed. The clamps are holding perfectly. The manifolds are operating within specifications. The fuel lines are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. She looked around the room at the confused faces. The design itself is the problem. You built something perfect, and perfect doesn't work in the real world. Commander Tora held up one of his 4 hands, and the room fell silent. He walked slowly toward the holographic display, studying the images with careful attention. How did you find this? He asked. Our engineers spent months looking at these systems. They used the most advanced diagnostic equipment in the galaxy. How did you see something they missed? Bora shrugged. I looked in a different place. What do you mean? Your engineers looked at the data. Fuel consumption numbers, engine performance reports, component stress analysis. They were looking for something broken. She pointed at the image of the clamp. I looked at the physical space, the actual metal, the way things fit together. I wasn't looking for something broken. I was looking for something wrong. Is there a difference? Tora asked. A big one. Bora walked back to where her toolkit sat on the table. Something broken shows up on diagnostics. It triggers alarms. It's obvious. But something wrong can hide forever. It can look perfect on every test and still cause problems. She picked up her coffee container and took a sip. The drink had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't seem to mind. Humans have been dealing with this for a long time, she continued. We've only been building machines for a few centuries, nothing compared to you, but we've made every mistake you can imagine. We've learned that the most dangerous problems aren't the ones that break. They're the ones that don't quite work right. Voss finally found his voice. How do we fix it? Bora smiled. That's the easy part. Easy? You're talking about 83 ships. The manifolds and fuel lines are integrated systems. To rebuild them with matching expansion rates would take... We're not rebuilding anything, Bora said. We're just going to let the fuel lines breathe a little. She opened her toolkit and pulled out a worn metal tool that looked like it belonged in a museum. It was a heating torch, simple and old-fashioned. Show me the nearest engine bay, she said. I'll demonstrate. Tora stared at the ancient tool in her hand. Then he looked at the confused engineers. Then he looked back at Bora. Follow me, he said. As they left the conference room, Voss fell into step beside Bora. I have been an engineer for 200 years, he said quietly. I have never felt so foolish. Bora glanced at him. Don't feel too bad. You were looking for what you were trained to find. Sometimes it takes someone from outside to see what's really there. But we had the same information you did. The same ships. The same access. You had better information, Bora corrected. You had centuries of experience, advanced diagnostics, perfect data. All I had was a hunch and a willingness to get dirty. She held up her hands, showing the grime that still stained her fingers. Sometimes that's enough. Engine Bay 7 was crowded. Word had spread through the flagship like fire through dry grass, and now it seemed like half the crew had found an excuse to be there. Engineers, technicians, even a few officers stood at a safe distance, watching the small human woman prepare to do something impossible. Bora Kang ignored them all. She stood in front of the fuel injection manifolds, her worn toolkit open on the floor beside her. The heating torch was in her hand, old and simple compared to the gleaming equipment that surrounded her. She looked like a painter standing in a museum, ready to touch up a masterpiece with a children's crayon. Chief Engineer Voss hovered nearby, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. This is not standard procedure, he said for perhaps the 10th time. The fuel lines are precision instruments. Applying direct heat could damage the calibration, disrupt the "It'll be fine," Bora said. She knelt down and began loosening one of the clamps. Her movements were careful but confident. The kind of motions that come from years of practice. The clamp came free with a soft click, and the fuel line shifted slightly. Several engineers gasped. "The line is moving!" someone shouted. "That's the point," Bora said calmly. She loosened 2 more clamps, creating a section of fuel line that could move freely. Then she lifted her heating torch and ignited it. A small blue flame appeared at the tip, casting strange shadows across the engine room. "What are you doing?" Voss asked, his voice rising with alarm. "I'm giving the line some flexibility." Bora applied the flame to a specific point on the fuel line, moving it slowly back and forth. The metal needs to soften just a little, enough to create a gentle curve. A curve? The lines are designed to be straight. The specifications clearly state, the specifications are wrong. Bora continued her work, ignoring the growing murmur from the crowd behind her. After a minute, she moved to another section of the line and repeated the process. Then another. And another. When she finally lowered the torch, the fuel line looked different. Instead of running in a perfectly straight path from the manifold to the engine, it now had a series of subtle curves. They were barely visible, just gentle bends that gave the line room to move when the metal expanded. "That's it?" Tora asked. He had been watching in silence from the back of the crowd. "That's it." Bora wiped her hands on her jumpsuit and stepped back. The curves eliminate the turbulence. The flexible mounting accounts for the expansion difference. When the engines heat up, the lines can adjust instead of fighting against the clamps. "It looks wrong," Voss said. The curves offended his sense of precision. After 2 centuries of engineering work, he had been taught that straight lines were better. That accuracy was everything. That any deviation from the specifications was a failure. "It does look wrong," Bora agreed. "It wouldn't pass a Kellex quality inspection. But it works." "Bora," she gestured toward the control panel. "Fire up the engine. Let's see what happens." The technician at the control panel looked at Commander Tora. This was not a decision anyone wanted to make without permission. If the human was wrong, if her strange modifications damaged the engine, the consequences would be severe. Tora nodded. "Do it." The technician pressed the activation sequence. Deep inside the ship, machinery began to move. The fuel injection system hummed to life, and the modified fuel line began to carry its load. Everyone watched the diagnostic display on the control panel. Numbers scrolled across the screen, measuring fuel consumption, engine temperature, injection efficiency. For a long moment, nothing seemed different. Then the efficiency numbers began to climb. "That's not possible," Voss whispered. But the numbers kept rising. Fuel consumption was dropping. Engine performance was improving. The modified section of the fuel injection system was operating better than it had since the ships were first built. Within 5 minutes, the efficiency readings had exceeded optimal parameters. "We're using less fuel than our own specifications say we should," the technician said, his voice filled with wonder. "The modifications are actually improving performance beyond the original design." Bora smiled. She had expected this. When you let the fuel flow smoothly instead of tumbling, you get better combustion. Better combustion means more power from less fuel. You weren't just losing efficiency from the expansion problem, you were losing potential you didn't even know you had. The crowd erupted into excited chatter. Engineers began pulling up calculations on their personal devices, trying to understand what had just happened. The modification that looked so wrong, so primitive, so against every principle they had been taught, was working better than their perfect design. Commander Tora pushed through the crowd to stand beside Bora. His forearms hung at his sides, and his expression was a mixture of amazement and something that might have been embarrassment. "Can this be applied to all the ships?" he asked. "Shouldn't take long," Bora said. "A few hours per ship, once your teams learn the technique. The process is simple. The hard part was figuring out what was wrong." "And what do we owe you for this?" Bora thought about it. The contract said 50,000 credits for a consultation. "That seems fair." Tora stared at her. "You just saved us 7 million credits a day. You found a solution that our best engineers missed. You revolutionized our entire fuel injection system, and you want 50,000 credits? That was the agreement. We could pay you millions. You deserve millions." Bora shrugged. 50,000 is what I asked for. I don't like changing deals after they're made." She began packing up her toolkit, carefully placing each tool back in its worn case. The heating torch went in last, still warm from use. "Besides," she added, "the money isn't why I do this. Then why do you do it?" Bora looked around the engine room at the massive machinery, the gleaming surfaces, the impossible technology that human beings could only dream of building, and at the tiny, almost invisible modification she had made, the simple curve in the fuel line that had fixed everything. "I like solving problems," she said. "The harder the better. And this was a good one." Raider. Raider. She zipped up her toolkit and stood. "Now, about that meal you offered. You mentioned something about lunch?" "No," Tora laughed. "It was a strange sound. Deep and rumbling. But genuine. I believe I did. Though I'm not sure what humans eat. Anything hot if you've got it. Fixing things makes me hungry." As they left the engine room, a young technician approached Voss. "Chief Engineer? The modifications, should we document them for the official records?" Voss looked at the fuel line with its gentle, imperfect curves. 200 years of engineering experience told him it was wrong. Every specification, every manual, every principle he had ever learned, said that precision was the answer. But the numbers didn't lie. "Yes," he said finally. "Document everything. And contact the training department. Every engineer in this fleet needs to learn how to do this." He paused, looking at the empty doorway where Bora had disappeared. "And add a note to the records. Sometimes, the best solution is the one that looks wrong." 2 weeks passed after Bora Kang left the flagship. In that time, her simple modification was applied to all 83 ships in the Varel Armada. The work went faster than anyone expected. Once the technique was understood, even the most traditional engineers could see the logic behind it. The results were immediate and dramatic. Fuel consumption dropped by nearly 40% across the fleet, not just to normal levels, better than normal. The ships were now more efficient than they had ever been, even when they were brand new. 7 million credits saved every day. Commander Tora spent long hours in his office, trying to process what had happened. He had commanded this fleet for 40 years. He had worked with the finest engineers in the galaxy. He had access to technology that humans could barely understand, and a woman with a worn toolkit and a cup of cold coffee had solved a problem that none of them could see. When it came time to file his official report to the Galactic Cooperative Trade Commission, Tora wrote carefully. He knew this document would be read by officials across a dozen star systems. It would become part of the permanent record of interstellar commerce. He wanted to get it right. The report was picked up by news networks within hours of its release. Within days, it became the most read document of the standard year. Everyone, from high-ranking politicians to common mechanics, wanted to know what had happened to the mighty Vorel Armada. The key passage was quoted everywhere. Human mechanics do not troubleshoot the way our engineers do. Our experts asked, "What is broken?" The human asked, "What is wrong?" These are not the same question. Our diagnostics confirmed every system was operating as designed. The human recognized that the design itself was the flaw. We have much to learn from a species that spent millennia building machines from incompatible parts and making them work anyway. The words spread through galactic society like ripples in water. They were discussed in engineering schools. They were debated in corporate boardrooms. They were printed on posters and hung in repair shops. Suddenly, everyone wanted to hire a human mechanic. Bora Kang became something of a celebrity, though she never seemed to understand why. Interview requests flooded her communication channels. Major corporations offered her positions with salaries that would have made most people faint. The Galactic Engineering Council invited her to join as a special consultant. She turned them all down. When the news finally tracked her down, she was at a space station near the outer rim of settled space. She had taken a new contract, a Mora cargo hauler with navigation problems that no one could explain. The journalists found her in the ship's navigation center, elbow deep in a disassembled gyroscope. A cup of cold coffee sat on a nearby console. "Forgotten hours ago. Miss Kang?" The lead reporter, a Kelix with official press credentials, pushed through the crowd of cameras and microphones. "May we ask you some questions?" Bora looked up from her work, her hands covered in grease. "Make it quick. I'm in the middle of something. The whole galaxy wants to know your secret," the reporter said. "You solved a problem that defeated the best engineers in known space. You saved the Vorel Armada millions of credits. How did you do it?" Bora wiped her hands on a rag and thought about the question. "I looked at the ships," she said finally. "But the other engineers looked at the ships too. They spent months. They looked at the data about the ships. That's different." The reporter paused, clearly confused. "Could you explain?" Bora set down the rag and leaned against the console. Behind her, the partially disassembled gyroscope sat in pieces, waiting for her attention. "Your engineers are trained to trust their instruments," she said. "They run diagnostics. They read reports, they analyze data, and that's fine most of the time. But sometimes the data can't tell you everything." She picked up a small component from the gyroscope, a bearing, worn and slightly bent. "You see this? The diagnostics said it was fine. The measurements fell within acceptable limits. But look at it. Really look at it. You can see the wear pattern. You can feel that it's not quite right. No computer is going to tell you that. You have to know what wrong looks like." "And how do you learn that?" the reporter asked. "By working with broken things. Humans have been doing that for a long time. We started with simple machines, wheels, levers, basic engines. Everything we built broke eventually, and we had to fix it. We couldn't afford to throw things away and start over. We had to make them work with whatever we had." She tossed the bearing lightly in her hand. "Your species have had advanced technology for centuries, millennia, some of you. When something breaks, you replace it with a new perfect part. You never have to improvise. You never have to work with mismatched components. You never have to make things function when they're not quite right." The reporter was recording everything, but he had stopped asking questions. He was just listening. "Humans learned a different lesson," Bora continued. "We learned that nothing is ever perfect. Everything is always a little bit wrong. The trick is figuring out how wrong is too wrong, and how to make things work anyway." She turned back to the gyroscope. "Now if you'll excuse me, I've got a hunch about this navigation problem, and lunch is in 3 hours." The reporters lingered for a few more minutes, but Bora had clearly finished talking. She was focused on her work now, moving pieces of the gyroscope around with careful attention. As they were leaving, one young journalist, a human, newly hired by a galactic news network, stopped at the door. "One more question, Miss Kang?" Bora glanced up. Do you ever miss working on simpler ships? Human ships, I mean. Instead of all this alien technology? Bora smiled. It was a rare expression on her usually serious face. A machine is a machine, she said. Doesn't matter who built it or how advanced it is. They all work the same way when you get down to basics. They all break the same way too. She picked up a tool and bent over the gyroscope. The only difference is how long it takes to figure out what's wrong. The journalist left, and Bora was alone again with her work. The space station hummed around her, filled with thousands of beings going about their business. Ships came and went through the docking bays. The galaxy spun on, vast and complicated, and full of problems waiting to be solved. Bora Kang picked up her coffee, took a sip, and made a face. It was cold again. She set it aside and went back to work. 3 hours later, just in time for lunch, she found the problem. A tiny misalignment in the gyroscope housing, invisible to sensors, undetectable by diagnostics. The navigation system had been compensating for it automatically, but the compensation was causing drift that grew worse over time. The fix took 20 minutes. When the Mora captain asked how she had found it so quickly, Bora just shrugged. Experience, she said, and a willingness to get my hands dirty. She collected her payment, packed her toolkit, and went to find something hot for lunch. There would be another contract tomorrow. Another problem to solve. Another machine that needed someone who understood how things broke. And Bora Kang would be ready.